Hello, 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 and welcome to Series 2 of The Communicators, an interview series by Parisi. I'm Nick Connor, and this week we're delighted to be joined by Nancy Lamb. Nancy is Head of Data Center and Construction Solicitor at arch.law. Based in Manchester and advising clients globally, she specializes in digital infrastructure and complex data center projects across Europe, Asia, and beyond. From the flat cities, you have to tell me if that's right or wrong, Nancy.
Oh, flat.
The
I wondered where you were going with that then. Flat,
flat city,
flat
flat,
city.
flat cities. Nancy works with developers, operators to solve legal challenges, get contracts signed, and facilitate cooperation. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Nick.
So, Nancy, you operate at the intersection of law, construction, and digital infrastructure. You're advising developers, operators, investors, technical teams, basically anyone who's involved in data centers, with all their different priorities and different challenges. So, how do you adapt your communication style when you're speaking to those different types of audiences?
Adapt my communicating style. I think anyone that knows me probably knows that I don't want to say a limited communication style, but it's fairly direct most of the time. I'm not one for using 1,000 words when two will do, regardless of the audience. Um, I think I'm very fortunate that before I came into a professional career, I had always worked. So I started off in a chip shop, I was a waitress, I'd worked a summer in a hotel, I had jobs at uni, in restaurants, in bars, I had an office job in London. Um, so I think before I'd even come into law, it gave me the ability to talk to people, just to people. Um, and I think um, I I don't come from I wasn't privately educated. I don't have that sort of a background. So I do have a fairly construction-ish background. So my dad was an electrician, my granddad was a steel fixer. Um yeah, so talking to builders actually was something that it was part and parcel of what I sort of grew up with really. And I must say that one of the things I do find probably is a point of difference for me is that I have done other things other than the law. So I haven't been strict private practice. I have worked in-house roles for contractors, for employers. I've done project management roles. Um, and I think you've just got to be oh, you just got to be authentic to who you are really. So you don't necessarily have to adapt your communicating style. I think it's more sometimes in what we do, which can be quite confrontational, is actually holding in that inner chimp when some of the conversations are, I don't triggering's the wrong word, but emotionally volatile. And actually, that's the skill. It's not necessarily tailoring your communication style because I think that's authentic to you. But I think one of the things that we learn as we go through our careers is actually and especially if you are a direct speaker like me and somebody who calls things out, is learning how to do that in a more effective way when you are in certain situations. Yeah, I mean, one things I will say is that adapting my communication style, it has only really ever happened when I've had to manage and lead design teams because
Mm.
that's a very different brain skill to mine. Um, and I think anyone who's worked on that side of things with me, I would often preface the conversation with, I'm not technical. I know I'm only a woman. Can you explain this to me in really simple terms because I don't understand? Um, to be able to understand, because designers are amazing. Um, any engineering skills are amazing, but their brains work in slightly different ways. So actually being able to pull them into your world and get the information you need out of them, um, can sometimes be a skill in itself.
Yeah, and that's interesting, and it's I guess because it's other people's minds. I guess it's all about trust, and and I'm just trying to think, for our dear listeners here, they're not lawyers. They and I'm just a man. I'm not a lawyer, so you have to put it in plain for me, Nancy. But the day to day job, I'm not negotiating. Where your job, really is just negotiating. So, what tips would you give to someone just like me on how to negotiate people? And is it about trust? Is it like you said, it's about when you're getting angry. I had one contractual negotiation that I've done in the last year, and I was getting really annoyed. The back and forward of the lawyers. How do you sort of stay calm and keep that inner chimp in its cage?
So I think negotiating is interesting, and a lot of how you do that, it's not always within your control. So I think one of the things I've definitely learned over time is if you get to a situation where it becomes sticky and difficult, something's amiss. There's a fundamental misunderstanding that's probably nothing to do with the law and more likely to be the commercial position that the parties have agreed. So I do often think that sticky parts are difficult and can be really irritating, but that's an instant red flag to say, well, let's strip this back. What are we talking about? What's being misunderstood, misaligned? Where have we strayed so that we're having that's difficult, sticky, frustrating conversation. So I often think that those things are when you recognize that as a moment in time when actually you need to listen and dig deeper and not argue, it takes the heat out of it, and you can actually take yourself to a calmer place to say, right, okay, let's explore this to understand what is causing the tension if everything else has been going okay. And often, sometimes the tension is just because the party on the other side maybe doesn't have the same legal experience or commercial experience or practical experience, doesn't necessarily understand the risk. But I think being a lawyer, especially in what I do in the DC world, so much of it is about understanding what you're building and understanding the risk and not negotiating something that for the sake of it, simply because you just don't understand the risk involved. So yeah, I negotiating is it can be when it works, it's fine. And I think when you get to the sticky points, for me, it's about unpacking those and being able to understand what's causing the frustration and the blocker. And I think the great advice is that negotiating is more about listening than talking, I think sometimes.
And is there a time where you do need to hammer it and be angry
Oh yeah.
and get
Yeah,
a
yeah,
point?
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I don't think anyone who's ever worked on a certain project will remember when I called the CTO of a certain design consultancy out and told him to stop baffling me with bullshit. So there is a time and a place for everything. Um, but I think those times and places are few and far between, and only in very exceptional circumstances will they have a desired result. Um, you know, the more I go into my career, and anybody who knew me in my 20s, which won't be know many people professionally, but my husband will probably vouch for this, is that with age comes far less aggression and a calmer place. And I do think that actually, yes, there is a time and a place for those moments where you do need to um you know, assert yourself in a certain way. But I do think those situations are few and far between. Um, I think sometimes as a woman they occur more. Um, yeah, I think they do occur more where you just have to be a little bit more assertive and call things out. But taking that to one side as a general principle, I do think that sometimes speaking quietly has the same effect as speaking or shouting.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think sort of being a woman that leads to more? Would you say it leads to more hostility, or is it just more patronizing? Is it, or what is it?
It's very rarely hostility. Um, I think it takes longer as a woman to build up trust for people to find you credible, um, and to engage with you. Um, and sometimes people are just downright rude to you and belittling, and that's just the way of the world. And I'd love to say I'm very, very fortunate in my career that I haven't had too many incidents, um, and things are definitely improving. Um, but I do think that as a woman as well, I think as I've got older, I've definitely become more aware of the hysteria narrative that can sometimes follow women around, and especially challenging women. Not everybody likes challenging women. Um, and actually that sometimes the speaking quietly, and actually sometimes the saying nothing can be equally as effective. Um, yeah, in terms of achieving an end result. And I think it's keeping that in mind that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And as much as my personal preference might sometimes be to absolutely have it just go at someone, that sometimes knowing that actually saying nothing will have the same outcome and be a better way to do it.
Would you and I do want to move on and to the talk about that what you were just saying there about saying nothing to be quiet techniques, but I'm just fascinated when you either talk about being a woman and facing audiences. One thing I remember reading was sort of Margaret Thatcher hated talking to other women. She loves surrounds herself with men where she could sort of manipulate
Yeah.
and things like that. Do you find it different, or do you find it refreshing if you are in like a negotiation or sort of a different sort of more high stakes situation when dealing with a counterpart who is a woman? Is it, or is it not different at all?
I'm not I- my approach to the whole equality thing is that we go out and we stand on our own 2 feet and everybody has their own merit. And I don't necessarily feel that one gender or the other is more or less difficult or more or less appealing. For me, the difficulty always comes generally when there is a lack of confidence on the other side, and actually their only tactic is aggression, and I think that's more, and I don't think that's gender related. I think that's just, as I say, everybody stands on their own and falls on their own merit, regardless of their gender. And I do must say that my own personal experience is that the difficulty comes when the other side have nothing other than aggression, um,
Yeah,
to get where they need to be.
yeah. It always reminds me when I worked in the pub. I had this sort of like a old, wise mentory type guy who was like giving me tips and things when I first started. And one of the tips he says, when you're dealing with like a really aggressive drunk guy, actually what you do, you drop your voice. So
Yeah,
I mean, it really affects them. They're like, oh, I'm really loud.
take the
Is
heat
it,
out of it.
yeah, exactly. How do you take, but when you're in sort of, let's say boardroom or Zoom room negotiations these days, what are the sort of tips to de-escalate things and get back on track? Because sometimes when people get angry, the conversation gets off track quite quickly.
Very quickly, very quickly. I think it depends on what your capacity is in that negotiation, and it depends on your instructions. So don't forget that we act on instructions as solicitors. So it depends what hat you're wearing. And actually, sometimes your instructions from your client are be an arsehole, be difficult, challenge, put, and some people just are given that mandate. Um, but I think if you take that mandate aside and you just look at it as a senior person in that situation, I think it always has to be, it's that managing that inner chimp, isn't it? It's actually being able to manage the emotive reactions, not being frightened to recognize them and actually call a timeout and just say, look, is now a convenient time for a coffee break, or I need to speak to my client, can I take instructions? Because sometimes actually just taking that time can just reset things. It especially when it's quite a heightened emotional thing. There's lots of science about simple things like smelling, sense of smell, and that bringing that grounding effect. And also, I do think it's keeping up with the meeting and having a strategy. going in with a, a plan and understanding, look, this is really where we want to get to. We definitely don't want to end up here, but this bit's okay. Um, and recognizing what's worth fighting for and what isn't. Um, Everybody is different at negotiating. I am not the most patient person in the world, and I am not one for making something take longer than it needs to. But some people are all about the process, and different nationalities are all about the process and having every point recited and done to the death. Even when actually we could have all said 35 minutes ago, no one's bothered about that. Let's move on to the next thing. Um, so, everybody is different. And I think you attract the clients that like your style. Um, so as I say, everybody's, and I don't think there's any right or wrong to negotiating. I think everybody has their own style. Um, but there's just tips, I think, for people when you get into the difficult bits of negotiating, which is generally when the emotions flare up.
Yeah, and on that strategy, I think like everyone in the UK, I live with the sort of the collective, post-traumatic stress of the Brexit negotiations. And I was always fascinated that the way they would start the conversation, they go, these are our red lines. So these are the non-negotiables, and let's talk about the middle. And I guess I'm just interested in sort of take it to the business world, and the structure and then strategy of, you're going in and go, well, this is the risk I'm trying to limit for my client. That's the risk they're trying to limit the client. My client's looking to build, they're looking to invest or whatever it is, um, and you use the phrase there, what is it worth it? Is it worth negotiating that? So I'm interested in the strategy of like, how do you approach it? Do you do like a Venn diagram of going, this is the risk, this is the things, or is it a case of just like, like you said, you're working on a mandate and instructions with your clients, and what is best for my clients, how, and then just staying on that objective and ignoring bits which might not be worth it, might not be interesting in your clients.
Yeah, I mean, I thought construction contracts are, I think you've always got, I mean, and I can only talk from a construction contract point of view, but you've always got a couple of eyes. You've got one eye, depending on who you're acting for, of what's the potential litigation risk and how big is the damage if any of these catastrophic situations occur. And then you've got the construction time risk, so the program and the cost risk, and who has taken what allocation. And then you've got the pressure of we need to like the ready for service date isn't moving. We need to get this signed and we need to get on site and we need to get cracking. Um, so there's often quite a few things to balance. And I think I am fortunate that I have some true construction experience of wearing the boots and the hat and being on the ground. And I think you soon start to understand, okay, look, a lot of that bit in the middle about who takes the risk of what, that's commercial. You guys should have thrashed that out. We'll make sure the drafting meets the requirements. Um, and depending on who you're acting for in terms of limits of liability, and indemnities and things like that, it it can be, I don't want to say it's fairly formulaic, but I think there's definitely an eye on the sector that we work in. And I suspect that that might change as the market becomes more equity and debt funded, as funders have far more eyes on construction contracts and have far more acute awareness in the risk in the construction phase rather than the catastrophic risk part of it. Um, but I think it's just about going through all of the scenarios with your client that can occur under these contracts and understanding who's taking the risk of what, and then drafting it. Um, the settlement side of things in terms of litigation is probably more strategic than the actual construction contract negotiations. Um, and that has a different level of thought. And I think I don't litigate myself. I litigate underneath others. That's not my bag. But that's definitely one where you probably have more of the Venn diagrams, the tables, the really like tactical, strategic plan in terms of negotiating. Um, yeah, there's definitely a difference between the strategies that you would employ if you're dealing with a transactional, getting the contract signed, and when you're dealing with a dispute and a settlement. And that's from a legal point, like a great getting the grey matter going there. That's quite interesting. That they're quite a different technique, I think.
I just got two sort of, I guess sort of knowledge questions. So what I mean, just to help people understand really. So what's the difference between when do you get called in versus what is getting done by the in-house teams? So what is the difference between, I guess, in-house and when people smash glass and call Nancy?
Well, to be honest, I'm not a smash glass lawyer, so that's a litigator. Um, and that happens to me very rarely because I don't litigate. And when it does, I'm like, great, thanks for getting me involved. We really need to see the lead up, which is great. Get us involved as early as possible, and then I can bring my litigation colleagues in who can start to look at things from a lens of litigation. So that to me is a real smash glass. Right, we're on site, we're late, we're delayed, the contractor's not performing. How are we going to strategically manage this? How do we manage all of the mechanisms in the contract now? But how do we do that with a lens on if this turns into adjudication, arbitration, litigation? Um, and then the other sort of smash glass moment is if you're trying to get a contract agreed and you just can't, it's not going anywhere. Then sometimes it can be useful. But it depends. In-house teams in the DC world run pretty light, but from my experience, some of them are, fairly adept at some of the construction stuff. So it depends on how funded and how resourced it is. But generally, we will get involved because in-house counsel will say to us, right, we've got a new project coming online. We need somebody to draft and put in place all of our consultants' appointments, our construction contracts, all of the security documents. We might be asked to do some DD if we've got funding involved. And then to sort of deal with any admin stuff in terms of extensions of time, variation claims, non-performance, and how we deal with that under the contract. So we generally do all the legwork and the drafting, and the in-house counsel sort of acts as that intermediary, that business translator, where they can go to the project team, to the board, and come back with instructions and translate what the business have told them into what we need to know as lawyers to be able to draft the contracts properly. But so for example, big contractors, they often have their own in-house legal teams, and they don't necessarily send out contracts to externals to negotiate with clients. It just very much depends on the bench strength of the in-house team, really.
And I do apologize because this is a legal requirement for me to ask this question. How do you think AI will change this nature of work of what you do, or even the in-house teams, not
Yeah.
just now, but over the next 20 years?
I think it will change it. I think that the pace at which it will change it may not be as fast as everybody is expecting. I have limited interaction with AI tools, but when I speak to our Chief Technology Officer, Daniel Pollock, um, there are some things out there that are getting there, but actually there's not anything out there on the market at the moment where we're all going, oh dear, that AI is coming for our jobs. But it will change, and I think this year in the UK, there was the first regulated law firm that's all AI, and it's debt management, like as in debt recovery, but it still has a human element checking all of that AI because it's in its infancy. So my personal view is that it will change, um, and it will. I would not want to be a junior. I don't. I feel like I'm grateful. I'm at the mid part of my career, and I'm looking for the next 20 years, and will be able to sit in that experience category. I think the purchasing of legal services will become, no, we are purchasing a partner's experience. The legwork will all be done eventually, I suspect, by AI. I mean, we can already put things into contract reviews and blah 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 blah. But my caveat with that is it will depend on the product. We have some quite strict, the SRA have some rules around data sovereignty, where the data can be kept. And I think you and I both know, Nick, from our experience in the sector, data sovereignty is becoming more and more of an issue. Microsoft brought out a new Azure product, or are starting to talk about a new Azure product that is tailoring that European data sovereignty. And I wonder whether the en masse learning that might be needed might be curtailed by that, and we might see a slowing of the development of products as they need to be more enterprise specific, um, you know, on your own servers, on your own learning LLM. So I don't know. It's definitely come in, and I'm glad I'm where I am in my career, and I see that partner-led experience service becoming something that will be of real value to businesses, while the legwork of a lot of what we do will eventually be AI driven. And actually being a lawyer, the negotiating skill won't be with your counterparts, it will be with the AI prompt and the information that you give it.
It's interesting talking about this of the partner experience. Um, I was talking to a colleague who works for one of the big accountancy firms, and he was telling me about a partner where actually he does a lot of the grunt work himself, a lot of the spreadsheet work. And he was like, this is really not the most efficient thing for this guy to be doing this, but they quite like it. And why he thinks his particular bit will be AI proof for a bit, because the billable hours for this guy to play with all his spreadsheet is so big. So in the sense
It
that
keeps
he
them,
thinks actually that innovation is probably there, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the
it
business
doesn't.
model.
I was going to say the business models are going to need to be really careful, because all of a sudden you are not generating an hourly rate fee. You are using a product. You people are paying for a product. And there was a case recently. I saw it flash up yesterday on one of the you get the news bulletins, and it was about clients saying to a law firm, you've used AI, we expect to see the savings. We are not paying the hourly rate of a solicitor for AI to do a contract review. So I do think that there is definitely going to be a recalibration in terms of AI and fees and what those business models look like. But I think that's a society-led question. I think we all have to be really honest as a society and say, well, hang on a second, if AI does come for everybody's jobs, where is people not only where is the economy going to come from, because really, are the government going to we all going to live on a universal income? And also, where do people's purposes come from? What are you getting up for in the morning? What's your drive? What are you doing? So I mean, this is not the podcast for it, but I definitely think there's a really high level social question around AI and the implementation of it at the scale that is being mooted. Whether that is a reality, I don't necessarily have a view, but I do think there is definitely a question around it.
Oh, I mean, I could bore listeners on the economic sort of missions of society, of how we need to have more leisure time over work time. But before we
We
do
do,
dive
but
in,
if you've got no work, if you've got no purpose, I think
yeah,
that the learnings out there on the effect of that on people's mental health is huge. I think most people, most of there is a lot of research that says having a purpose is one of the things that is
yeah,
most
absolutely.
important to people.
No, absolutely. And it's so important, to particularly, and like you said, with sort of younger people coming into the industry where it is gonna, I don't think we truly appreciate the effect AI is gonna have on this new cohort of generation who will be less purposeful because the work's gonna be different. I mean, would you go into law now yourself if you're entering?
I've had two family members talk to me about that. And I think the law is so multifaceted. So I see it very much from a corporate lens. One of my best friends is a lawyer who deals with public inquests in terms of suicides that have happened in police custody, that kind of thing, who does it for the good of the world. And that is incredibly honourable. And I think it depends on your driver for going into law. I've always said that private practice law is a really hard way to earn a living. Only the tiny, tiny top percent really earn the mega bucks. A lot of people are stuck in this salaried partner bracket that is like sold as the dream, when actually you can earn that kind of money doing something far less stressful. Um, so it depends on your driver for going into law. It served me very well. It keeps my brain ticking over. It gives you that academic um drive. But it will be a very different place coming in as a junior now. Um, And that's depending on why you're going into it would probably determine whether you should be doing it or not. And I don't know that it is as accessible as it once was. I know there is now apprenticeships, which are a great idea, but I think with the way that university is going and it becoming such a more privileged thing to be able to do, um, I don't know whether the law will be as accessible as it was when I came into it, however many years ago. I don't want to say the number out loud, it makes me feel a bit sick.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Before we dive in a bit deeper, let's talk a bit about Parisi. So, Parisi, we are specialists in communications, helping organizations achieve their commercial objectives, whether that's raising profile, attracting investment, or shaping policy environments. We combine traditional PR with public affairs, with marketing and content-led strategies, always focused on delivering the outcomes rather than simply the activity. Now, Nancy, let's just turn to the data center industry. We spoke a bit about the legal industry. This is fascinating, and we could probably talk another half an hour on that. But let's focus a bit on data centers. Now, we've seen in the news over the last, 18 months now, 2 years, that data centers are often described as one of the fastest growing sectors globally. Some people are even arguing it's unstoppable. But then, I turn my newspaper and others are arguing whether it's getting a bit overheated. So I guess my question to you is, are data centers becoming a bubble, or is this part of a structure, long-term growth?
I think there is no question that they are becoming part of the infrastructure of life. I think that obviously as we become a more and more digital society, they are there and they underpin the backbone of everything. But my view is that there is a lot of noise and not a lot of doing at the moment. Um, I think I was reading in one of the sector publications about a slowdown in data center build in the US for the first time since 2020. I'm not sure if that's the right date, but there is a slowdown for the first time in X many years. And I think that that is a huge indicator of where things are going. Um, I think that in Europe, it is buoyant, but the noise is a bubble. And I mean, the UK in particular, for all the noise, what's actually translating to bricks on the ground it's not as you would believe if you just come in and looked at the news. Um, and I think there's lots of interesting conversations going on around private equity funding and how that has very much a little bit, I think, caught a cold in terms of the instability of the construction phase or the risk that is in there that actually that isn't completed on time. So I think the whole market is definitely less gung-ho than it was. There's a lot more due diligence being done at the funding stage than there once was. And what happens in America generally then follows through in Europe and the UK. I think for me, the interesting market, everybody's been so focused on AI and hyperscale and large learning models and massive data centers. I think the attention is coming back, and we are seeing the attention coming back in terms of distressed assets, in terms of old data center portfolios being sold at a really reasonable price, needing a lot of investment, but that colo space, and especially because data sovereignty is an issue. The rise of the European cloud is somewhere I have my eye. I have my eye on inference because once we work out what we're doing with, AI inference is going to become quite important. And back to those smaller 5 to 20 megawatt facilities. So I think it's a buoyant market. It's a sector I like being in. Um, and a sector I will stay in, but I think that will start to come hand in hand with more energy work. Data centers and energy are going to become best buddies. You won't get one without the other. Really interesting stuff in terms of SMRs and renewables. But yeah, for me, it's not a sector that it's not as buoyant as my personal view is that it is not as buoyant as the media may have you think. And also, I think you've got to ask yourself the question, okay, well, even in the UK, how many data centers are actually going to be built? We're not talking thousands. It's not like office buildings. They are much few and far between. We've had some interesting planning decisions, things being called back in. All of this unsettles the market. So yeah, I think it's a buoyant sector. Is it a bit of a bubble? I think so. And are things going to get a little bit tighter? Definitely, especially given the current global situation. I think the price of steel skyrocketed yesterday in 24 hours, and the impact of that on data center bills is huge. And when your margins are already very tight, and if you think the cost per megawatt has doubled in 10 years, um, actually, will what was a once a viable construction budget now not be one and slow things down even more?
So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, we're moving from hype to reality. And I guess, over the last 18 months, 2 years, we've heard, about billions skins spent on this data center, that data center. How much of these data centers do you think, I'm looking from a UK, but, feel free to globalize this, how many of these data centers which have been announced over the last 2 years will actually be built?
I think they will all be built eventually. I just think the pace at which they will be built is much slower than anybody anticipates.
And
With
explain to me one of the things I've never understood when X data center is announced, they said, it's good. This data center is a billion pound data center. What's that money going to? Yeah.
all sorts actually. So a lot more money that so I look at I have a construction lens on it. So a lot of it is going to build the data center, but don't forget an awful lot of it is then going to put the racks inside the data center, depending on who's building it, how you're building it, who's operating the racks, who they belong to. But that and the numbers being bounded around, are not just construction numbers. They then encompass all the numbers for the all of the IT that goes inside it. And those numbers are huge, absolutely huge. Um, and the rack, the other thing to think about as well is the rack technology. I was having a conversation about a data center that was deploying 200 kilowatt racks, which is insane, like crazy. And if you think about liquid cooling and the pace of traditional construction versus how fast and how quick NVIDIA are pushing those racks, um, I wonder whether, the next thing is that actually we don't just give you a rack, we give you a modular data center that's got a cooling system that can deal with these mega kilowatt racks. Um, yeah, so I think that the money banded around is huge sums, and I do think the investment will come over time. But I think people feel like the noise makes it feel like it's a very instant spend, and actually it's a portfolio build out over a course of time. Um, yeah, and it will, I think it will all happen. I just don't think it will happen at the pace at which people expect. It's going to be slower, much slower.
And do you think the industry needs it to be fast? And this might, and I'm thinking from a investor point of view, if it is going to be slower and therefore their returns are going to be slower, do you think that might, sort of scare them a bit?
I think it's moving as fast as it needs to. If it needed to move faster, it'd be moving faster. It is not, we're not a sector that don't react when we are, we can move at pace and we do move at pace when it's needed. But I think the reality of the situation is that everybody knows that eventually all of these megawatts of IT space will be needed for all of this data, but it's not needed right now. Because otherwise we'd be building it, and I think that's part of the conundrum. If it was such a solid market, people would be building speculatively knowing they were going to get a tenant. They wouldn't even need to build speculatively. They would have LOIs and they would have binding LOIs in their hand. But I think that's the issue, that we're building at the pace that is required. And for me, I'm at the construction phase. So I talk to banking colleagues, property colleagues, I talk to the consultants, I talk to the suppliers, the kits on long lead times. You listen to what they're doing and where they're seeing green shoots or not, to understand actually when is this stuff going to come through to bricks on the ground. And at the moment things are, I think, not as green as you would imagine if we were going to have this instant build out. So it's, it's there. It's not there at the instantaneous speed that the hype would indicate.
And you touched upon it earlier
I don't
on
mean to be
sort of
the harbinger of doom, by the way.
yeah, no, actually, I thought that's actually quite a positive
Oh, that's good.
message. You're telling investors, don't worry, it will get built, which is, I think, some reassurance some of them need. I think you touched upon it earlier about your sort of sovereign aspect. Now, I don't want to get into sort of sovereign of our data and things like that. I mean, you can do, but I'm actually quite interested more on the construction side. And there's going to be a case, and I'm not sure it's fully clipped within policy circles, but AI training is basically using our data. And do you really want your data to go to another country? Does your citizens who wrote you in really want their bank and medical records going to another country? But I guess, so when that does clip, I think every country is going to be looking at how to sovereign it. And I guess my question is actually on the build side is there maybe an arms race where some of that technology of how to build a data center or how to power a data center, that's also sovereign? And do you think we might see more protections on, well,
It's
let's keep
currently
some
a
of
power
this
race anyway.
knowledge in-house?
Well, I think that the technology to build a data center is fairly well understood globally. I don't think there will be novelties and nuances, but generally it's fairly well understood. The power conundrum it's a power race, which is not dissimilar to an arms race. Um, but again, I think given the current global geopolitical situation as we speak today, I wonder whether the power sovereignty is just going to jump to the top of everybody's agenda, regardless of data centers, but just from a power sovereignty point of view. And I think it was last year in Brussels, I think Lex Cause told a great story about a specific power project, and I think it was in Germany, but it must have been near Ukraine, that these specific power works that needed for, I don't know, maybe they were transmission upgrades or something, generally took 7 years to do. But they got it done in 7 months because it was necessary. Necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think what will drive forward the power race, which is what it is. It is having something that does that. And I think AI in data centers and power are doing that. But I actually wonder whether the geopolitical situation will just spur that on, and that the renewables will jump to the top of everybody's agenda. And actually how we harness the renewable power for data centers is going to be something that's really important, and there will be some innovation there. I think the SMRs will come online. You saw that Cornwall had the first geothermal power come online this week, and there's some really interesting stuff going on down in Cornwall in terms of data centers and that much smaller end of the market, which everybody overlooks. But there's lots of stuff that goes on in terms of renewables. And I think that, as I said, data centers and power are going to become best friends. It's going to go hand in hand. You're not going to see one without the other. Data centers are going to have to generate their own power, I think, in a long-term position. But I also think power sovereignty is just going to be at the top of everybody's agenda, which can be, that's only a good thing to push that renewables technology forward quicker and faster.
Yeah, let's stay on power. I want to talk a bit about renewables, but before we do, I'm interested in what you're talking there about, sort of, sort of the technology of data centers and power. And I'm just trying to think ahead, what is the future for, you talk about SMRs, but, there's going to be, like yourself, I meet with the guys at Rolls-Royce a fair bit. And, that it's going to be 10 years without delay, that's going to be on. So I'm interested in hearing like what the short-term fixes, what the long-term fixes, and also let's get a bit sci-fi. I've seen stuff, in like circa like 50 years time, like every skyscrapers can have a data center on top,
Yeah.
and it's going to be powered by a mini nuke, and you talk about Cornwall and the mini sort of things, what are some of the innovations you're seeing? And, I guess everyone's thinking for the challenge of power is probably what's going to drive innovation.
Well, I think you need to look at it at the full breadth of what a data center is. So a data center is basically a server room, but on a larger scale. And that can be everything from a megawatt or less, right up to these gigawatts that we were talking about, but that does seem to have fallen out of fashion slightly now. And I think the long-term solution is probably SMRs, and that is quite a way off. But as we've just discussed, the pipeline is quite a way off as well. Like if we're waiting 5 to 10 years for SMRs, at the gigawatt scale, we're that far away from needing that sort of power anyway in terms of the build out. So I think the smaller stuff is where it's really interesting because you can power those. You can put up a certain size data center in a car park. And some of that doesn't necessarily need the power that we think it does because there's some really innovative things happening with free air cooling. And once you take away the need for cooling powered by electricity, the power that you need is greatly reduced. And then when you add that into things like geothermal, solar, all sorts of things, that smaller end of the spectrum, I can really see, you talking about having a data center in every single skyscraper. We probably will, and it will probably be powered by renewable energy. Um, there's a lot going on in that space. And then I think, the bigger end of the scale, the build out times for those anyway, I wonder whether there will be a catalyst for pushing forward the technology and getting the SMRs to market much quicker that will actually coincide with when the real push for the bigger builds comes online because we are talking about the future and that future is 10, 20, 50 years down the line. And I think the other thing to think about is, data centers at the moment are really big. Do they need to be really big? Will they need to be really big? We might need one or two far out big things for learning LLMs, but actually inference is much smaller. So, that conundrum of the blend of the size and the scale and the need and the use, the job of that data center, will dictate how it runs. And I think we will see a much more blended future in terms of size and power source and location. And I think as this comes more into the public psyche about how we take more public benefit from data centers, we can see them becoming probably more embedded in communities, but that takes long-term planning and thinking, for example, district heat networks. Food, they're like some of these can be like mini greenhouses. I've seen some great stuff. That's talking about using the domes like they do down at the Eden Project, for mini data centers that are free air cooled, hot inside, grow food, all sorts of like wonderful things on that much smaller end of the market. So, modular data centers are definitely, I think, going to happen. I wonder whether Nvidia will push their own modular data center because they push that rack stuff so fast, so quickly that traditional construction can't keep up. And we're going to see a real variation in data center size. It's not all about the gigawatt. That's there are going to be a few of those needed, but actually, when we turn things into inference, when they work out how to monetize AI and robotics, I think robotics have probably got a bigger future than perhaps things, AI coming for our jobs. That for me in terms of manufacturing and all sorts of stuff. I mean, if someone wants to come and clean my house, I'm all for that. All for it. So yeah, so I think there'll be a much more blended future in terms of power source, size, use, application, all of those things.
Yeah, and I guess, robots, data centers, which power AI, but electric cars, it doesn't really matter. It's all coming from electricity, and so power is it. And maybe one of the UK's asset is that we do have power, and if we get some nuclear online and our renewables, plus maybe short term, you've got the North Sea as well. We're actually probably in quite a good position. But I guess
the innovation actually, Nick, that would be most effective would be for sorry, the cat just bit me. Oh, you monkey.
yeah.
Would be some innovation in terms of that grid queue, and actually some certainty in terms of criteria for what projects are in the queue, out the queue, how fast we can speed that up, and the grid. Innovation in terms of upgrading our current grid is probably as important as innovation in terms of future
Mm.
power. The quicker we can utilize the power that we can already generate and get that to where it is needed, that to me is as important as thinking about, what the future new stuff. Let's implement what we've already got properly.
So what do you think of things like AI growth zones, which, apart from being a nice headline for the government, to be cynical, seems like one of the things is about energy discounting for data centers which are based there. And it seems like, well, actually, if you do a Venn diagram of Labour seats which are at risk and AI growth zones being announced, that seems to be quite a collection. But thankfully for that, also means it's going into sort of post-industrial towns which probably need a bit of investment, a bit of life. So what do you think of these AI growth zones? And I guess what I'm also trying to push at is, how can these be a community asset? How can they be a thing of good?
So I think we all need to be aware that there is potentially a political change on the horizon. You know, could we see the rise of the Greens, and what impact would that have in terms of AI growth zones and data centers and just renewable energy and all of those things, which and this is very much my personal view, is that I feel like all of that is a positive, and I feel like the way that we can take some benefit from data centers, whether that's AI growth zones, how whatever label or buzzword, or we need to have a proper strategy. So as I've said, data centers and AI is blended. AI growth zones to me seem to speak to large language models to fight, the energy that you had to say you had is for the much larger data centers. There's no getting away from, nobody is going to do AI training in this country because the power is too expensive. It's too expensive, full stop. So until we address that problem, the growth zones are kind of muted or stuck because they're not going to be taken up for that purpose, because it's too expensive to do it. So then you look at the smaller size data centers, which are not AI models, they are cloud or they are inference, and that's all to do with latency. So that's really going to stay where it is or close by. And until somebody of a hyperscale nature comes outside of the current sort of zones of Southwest London, East London a little bit, and moves away from that. No, but those sorts of things are not going to go into an AI growth zone either, because they need the latency. So I think as an idea, yeah, there's some sound ideas behind it, but the implementation and the strategy and the actual thought and knowledge of the market and the sector and how these things operate is probably a little bit lacking. Um, yeah, I mean, Danny Quinn up in Scotland has got the company name escapes me right now. Um, is it with Enlighten? And they've just got a new AI growth zone tabled. Um, but that's because he is involved and he has an intricate knowledge of his specific sector within the sector. And I think that's what's missing is really a proper understanding of what the opportunities are and exactly which opportunities the UK is going after, and being strategic and focused about it, rather than jumping on an AI bandwagon where we're just too expensive for anybody to use it for that purpose.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Well, I've been Nick Connor, and you've been listening to The Communicators, an interview series by Parisi. If you have any questions for us, or probably more likely for Nancy, then drop them in the comments. And please don't forget to give us a like.